This might be the most controversial quarterback decision in the NFL right now, because the Cleveland Browns are quietly heading toward a situation that could change everything. On one side, you've got Deshaun Watson, a quarterback with a massive contract, years of expectations, and a reputation he's still trying to live up to. On the other side, Shedeur Sanders, the young, confident rising star who many believe is already the future of the franchise. And here, where it gets complicated. This isn't just about who's the better quarterback. This is about money, pressure, reputation, and a decision that could either save a career or end one. Because if Watson struggles, everything shifts. And if Shedeur steps up, there's no going back. So the real question is, are the Browns actually running a fair competition, or has this already been decided behind the scenes? Because when you really break this situation down, it's not just about football. It's about money. A lot of it. The Cleveland Browns didn't just bring in Deshaun Watson as another player, they invested heavily in him. One of the biggest financial commitments in the league. The kind of deal that doesn't just disappear overnight. And that changes everything. Because now, this isn't just a quarterback competition. It's a business decision. There's been a lot of discussion around this, with insiders suggesting that Watson is still viewed as the frontrunner, not necessarily because of performance, but because of what the team has invested in him. Nothing officially confirmed as a locked decision, but enough to shape how people see this battle. And honestly, it makes sense. Because from a front office perspective, you don't commit that kind of money just to move on quickly. You give it time, you give it chances, you try to make it work. But here where the tension starts. Because football doesn't care about contracts. It cares about results. And if those results don't show up, that investment becomes a problem. A big one. Because now you're stuck between two realities. On one side, you've got Watson, the veteran, the experience, the financial commitment, the player you're supposed to build around. On the other side, you've got Shedeur Sanders, younger, cheaper, and in many ways more exciting. A player with upside, momentum, and growing belief from fans. And when those two things collide, that's when organizations get tested. Because now the question isn't simple anymore. It's not just who's better. What are we willing to admit? Because if Sanders outperforms Watson, even slightly, what do you do? Do you stick with the player you paid? Or do you pivot to the player who gives you the better chance to win? That's the dilemma. And it's not theoretical. It's real. There's even been speculation that if Watson struggles early, the pressure to make a switch will build fast, not just internally, but from fans and media as well. Again, nothing officially confirmed, but you can already feel the tension building around that possibility. Because in today's NFL, patience is limited, especially when expectations are high. And right now, the Browns are walking a very thin line, trying to balance investment with reality. And the longer that balance holds, the more pressure builds. Because eventually, they're going to have to make a decision. And when they do, it won't just define the quarterback room. It could define the entire future of the franchise. But here, where things get even more complicated. Because this decision isn't being made in silence. Because behind the scenes, people are already talking. And not just fans. We're talking about former players, analysts, and insiders who understand exactly how these decisions get made inside NFL buildings. One of the most interesting takes came from Jarvis Landry, someone who knows the Cleveland Browns environment firsthand. And his perspective, it didn't avoid the reality. The idea being discussed is simple, but uncomfortable. This is still Deshaun Watson's job, for now. Not necessarily because he's clearly outperforming everyone else, but because of what's tied to him. The contract, the investment, the expectations. There's been ongoing conversation suggesting that from a front office mindset, Watson remains the frontrunner until he gives the team a clear reason to move on. Nothing officially confirmed as a final decision, but it lines up with how organizations typically operate. Because when you've invested that much into a player, you don't walk away easily. You wait. You evaluate. You give it every chance to work. But here where it gets interesting. Because even within those same discussions, another question keeps coming up. What happens if it doesn't work? And that's where the tone shifts. Because if Watson struggles, if the performance doesn't match the expectations, then suddenly everything changes. Now, it's not about protecting the investment anymore. It's about saving the season. And that's when Shedeur Sanders becomes impossible to ignore. There's been growing speculation that in that scenario, the transition could happen quickly, not gradually, not over time. Vast, because once a team realizes the current setup isn't working, they don't hesitate. They pivot. And that's exactly what insiders are hinting at. Not a guaranteed switch, but a very real possibility. And here's the part that adds even more pressure. Because this isn't just about one season. For Watson, this could define everything. There's been talk that if things go the wrong way, his long-term future in the league could become uncertain. Not officially stated by teams, but a conversation that's been circulating. The kind of situation where a player goes from being a franchise cornerstone to fighting for another opportunity somewhere else. That's how quickly things can flip. And that's why this moment feels so important. Because both sides of this situation are under pressure, but for completely different reasons. Watson is trying to prove he's still the guy. Sanders is waiting for the moment to show he can be the guy. And the team, they're stuck right in the middle, trying to figure out when or if that shift should happen. But here what makes this even more intense. Because this isn't just about what insiders are saying. It's about what happens when reality hits the field. Because this is where the entire situation flips. Not slowly, not gradually, but instantly. If Deshaun Watson struggles early in the season, everything changes. And not just a little bit, completely. Because at that point, the Cleveland Browns can't hide behind investment anymore. They can't point to contracts. They can't rely on past reputation. They have to face what's happening right now, on the field. And that's when the pressure becomes real. Because once fans start seeing missed throws, stalled drives, inconsistent performances, the noise builds fast, very fast. There's already been speculation that if Watson doesn't deliver early, the calls for a change could come almost immediately. Nothing officially confirmed, but based on how quickly narratives shift in the NFL, it's not hard to see how that would happen. Because this league doesn't wait. And Cleveland, they definitely don't. This is a team that wants to win now. Not 2 years from now. Not eventually. Now. So if the offense struggles, if the results aren't there, if the momentum starts slipping, the conversation won't be, let's give it more time. It'll be, what's the alternative? And that's where Shedeur Sanders comes in. Because unlike Watson, Sanders represents something different. Hope, energy, a fresh direction. And most importantly, a reset. Because when things aren't working, teams don't just look for solutions, they look for change. Something that shifts the momentum. Something that gives the locker room a spark. Something that gets fans back on board. and a young quarterback stepping in. That's exactly that kind of move. But here what makes this even more intense. Because if that switch happens, there's no going back. Once you bench a high-paid veteran for a rookie, you've made your decision. You've chosen your direction. And everything that comes after that is built around it. That's why this situation feels like a ticking clock. Because right now, Watson still has control. But it's fragile. One bad stretch. One rough start. One moment where things don't click. And suddenly, the entire conversation shifts. From "this is his team" to "how long until they make the move?" And when that question starts getting asked seriously, it's already closer than people think. Because in the NFL, jobs aren't lost over time. They're lost in moments. And Watson is heading into a stretch where every moment matters. Every throw, every decision, every game. Because behind him, waiting for that one opening, is a quarterback who doesn't need many chances to change everything. And that's what makes this situation so dangerous. Because once that door opens, it doesn't close easily. And this is where things quietly start shifting. Because while all the pressure is on Deshaun Watson to hold his position, Shedeur Sanders is building something in the background. And most people don't even realize it. Because here's the reality. Sanders doesn't need to be perfect right now. He just needs to be ready. Ready for the moment. Ready for the opportunity. Ready for when things start to go sideways. And that's a powerful position to be in. Because unlike Watson, he's not carrying expectations of "you have to prove everything immediately." Instead, he's building quietly, learning the system, understanding the speed of the game, getting comfortable without the weight of being the starter yet. And that's where his advantage starts to show. Because historically, quarterbacks who step in after observing, learning, and adjusting, they often perform better early than expected. There's been growing discussion suggesting that Sanders already shows signs of being a gamer, someone who elevates under pressure rather than shrinking from it. Nothing officially confirmed by the team as a final label, but enough moments have been mentioned to keep that idea alive. And that matters, because when a quarterback has that trait, coaches notice, teammates notice, the locker room feels it. And that's where momentum begins. Because talent might get you drafted, but belief gets you the job. And right now, Sanders is starting to build that belief. Not loudly, not through headlines, but through small, consistent moments that add up over time. And here's the key part. He doesn't have to beat Watson in every category. He just has to show enough. Enough composure, enough decision-making, enough control in key situations. Because once that comparison starts leaning even slightly in his favor, the conversation changes. From "he's the future" to "why not now?" And that's when things accelerate. There's also speculation building that internally, teams often start preparing for a transition before they actually make it public. Nothing confirmed specifically in this case, but it's a pattern seen across the league. Because decisions like this don't happen overnight. They build, gradually, until one moment makes it official. And if Sanders keeps trending upward, that moment might come sooner than people expect. Because here's the truth. Upside is powerful. Potential is exciting. But controlled, consistent performance, that's what forces decisions. And Sanders is getting closer to that point. Closer to turning possibility into reality. Which is exactly why this situation doesn't feel like typical competition anymore. Because when one player is defending his spot, and the other is rising toward it, It's only a matter of time before those two paths collide. And when they do, that's when everything changes. And this is where the situation starts to feel a little questionable. Because on the surface, the Cleveland Browns keep calling it a quarterback competition. That sounds fair. That sounds balanced. That sounds like the best player will win the job. But when you look a little closer, it doesn't feel that simple. Because if this were a completely even battle, there wouldn't be so many underlying factors pulling in different directions. On one side, you've got Deshaun Watson, a player tied to a massive contract, years of investment and expectations the organization can't ignore. On the other side, you've got Shedeur Sanders, a younger option, less financial risk, and a growing wave of momentum. That's not neutral. That's pressure on both sides. And that's why people are starting to ask a different question. Is this really a competition? Or is it a transition waiting to happen? There's been a lot of buzz suggesting that situations like this are often decided internally before they're ever announced publicly. Not confirmed in this exact case, but it's a pattern teams have followed before. Because organizations don't like uncertainty. They plan ahead. They prepare for outcomes. They map out scenarios long before fans ever hear about them. And when you apply that idea here, it starts to make sense. Because think about the signals. The way Sanders is being talked about. The growing belief around his future. The subtle shift in how people inside and outside the organization describe him. None of it feels accidental. It feels like positioning. Like the team is slowly preparing everyone for what might come next. And here, where it gets even more interesting. Because sometimes, teams don't want to rush that transition. They don't want to make it feel forced. They let it happen naturally. Through performance. Through opportunity. Through a moment that makes the decision obvious. And that moment, it usually comes when the current starter gives them a reason. Which brings everything right back to Watson. Because as long as he performs, this stays a competition. But the second he does, it stops being one. And that's why this situation feels so tense. Because it's not just about who wins the job. It's about when the decision becomes unavoidable. Because once that tipping point is reached, there's no more debate, no more discussion, no more waiting, just action. And based on how things are building right now, that moment might be closer than people think. Because when a competition starts feeling like a countdown, you already know what's coming next. And now, this isn't just happening inside the building anymore. It's spilling everywhere. Because the moment a situation like this becomes public, the fans get involved, and that's when things really start to heat up. Right now, the Cleveland Browns fan base is split. Not slightly, completely. On one side, you've got people still backing Deshaun Watson. Their argument, simple, he's the veteran. He's been there before. And if he can return to even a version of what he showed earlier in his career, then the Browns have a real shot at competing immediately. To them, it's about experience, stability, trusting the investment. But on the other side, there's a growing group pushing for Shedeur Sanders. And their reasoning feels just as strong. They see upside, energy, momentum, a quarterback who hasn't peaked yet and might bring something the team has been missing. To them, it's not about what used to be. It's about what's coming next. And that difference, that's what's creating tension. Because now every update, every practice report, every rumor, no matter how small, gets pulled into this debate. One side sees it one way. The other sees it completely differently. And that's how narratives grow. There's been a lot of discussion online suggesting that the fan base is becoming more vocal about wanting a change, especially if things don't start strong. Nothing officially tied to team decisions, but the noise is definitely building. And in today's NFL, that matters more than ever. Because teams hear it. They see it. They feel it. Fan pressure isn't the only factor, but it's part of the environment. And when that pressure lines up with performance issues, that's when decisions start happening faster. Because no organization wants to feel like they're falling behind expectations, especially when there's an alternative already in place. And that's what makes this situation so intense. Because now, it's not just coaches evaluating quarterbacks. It's fans debating it daily. It's media amplifying every detail. It's the entire conversation surrounding the team shifting toward one question: who should start? And the longer that question stays unanswered, the louder it gets. Because uncertainty creates noise. And noise creates pressure. And pressure, that forces decisions. So now, this isn't just a football situation anymore. It's a full-blown debate. One that's building momentum every single day. And eventually, that momentum has to go somewhere. Because when enough people start asking the same question, it doesn't stay unanswered for long. Which brings everything back to the one thing that can actually settle it. And after all the debates, all the opinions, all the noise surrounding Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders, it all comes down to one thing: performance. Because no matter how much money is involved, no matter what insiders say, no matter how divided the fan base becomes, none of it decides the job. The field does. That's where everything gets exposed. Because in practice, you can control the environment. In interviews, you can shape the narrative. But in real games, there's nowhere to hide. And that's exactly what makes this moment so important for the Cleveland Browns. Because once the season begins, the evaluation becomes simple. Can you move the offense? Can you make the right decisions under pressure? Can you win games? That's it. Everything else disappears. And this is where things start to favor Sanders in a very interesting way. Because there's been a lot of talk about him being a gamer, someone who performs better when the lights are on, when the pressure is real, when the moment actually matters. Not officially labeled by the team in a final sense, but enough observations to make it part of the conversation. And if that's true, then this situation could flip fast. Because games reveal what practice can't. They reveal composure. They reveal instincts. They reveal who can actually handle the moment. And if Sanders steps into that environment and delivers, even for a short stretch, the conversation changes instantly. From should he start to why isn't he starting already? That's how fast it moves. But on the flip side, this is also Watson's opportunity to take control. Because if he performs, if he looks confident, decisive, and in command, then all the noise fades away. The debate quiets down. The questions disappear. And the job stays his. That's the balance. That's the pressure. Because both quarterbacks are heading toward the same moment, but with completely different stakes. Watson is trying to hold onto something. Sanders is trying to take it. And in situations like that, there's no middle ground. One rises, one steps back. That's how it works. Because in the NFL, you don't win jobs with potential. You win them with performance. And right now, everything is lining up for that exact moment, where all the talk stops and the truth shows up. Because when the games begin, That's when we finally get the answer everyone's been waiting for. And now, we've reached the point where this isn't just a quarterback battle anymore. This is a franchise decision. Because whatever the Cleveland Browns decide to do with Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders, it's going to define their future. Not just this season, but the next few years. Because think about what's really at stake here. If they stick with Watson and it works, then everything gets justified. The contract, the patience, the belief, it all makes sense. But if they stick with him, and it doesn't work, then it becomes something else. A missed opportunity, a delay in transition, a decision that could have been made earlier, but wasn't. And in a league where timing is everything, that matters. On the other side, if they move to Sanders and he delivers, then the narrative flips completely. Now it looks like vision, confidence, a team willing to make a bold decision at the right time. But if they move too early, and he struggles, then the questions come right back. Was he ready? Did they rush it? Did they move on too soon? That's the risk. And that's why decisions like this are never simple. Because there's no safe option. Every path comes with pressure. Every choice comes with consequences. And that's exactly where the Browns are right now. Standing in the middle of two timelines. One built on what they've already invested. The other built on what they could become. And eventually, they have to choose. There's also been speculation that internally, teams often look for a moment to make these decisions, something that makes the choice obvious. A performance, a turning point, a stretch of games that forces clarity. Nothing officially confirmed here, but if you watch closely, it feels like they're waiting for that moment. Waiting for something that removes the doubt. Because once that happens, the decision becomes easy. And when that decision is made, everything shifts. The locker room, the expectations, the direction of the team, all of it. Because quarterback isn't just another position. It's the position. It sets the tone. It defines identity. It determines how far a team can go. And right now, the Browns are on the edge of figuring out exactly what their identity is going to be. Because whether it's Watson or Sanders, that choice is going to echo for a long time. And the craziest part, we're closer to that answer than most people realize. Because in the NFL, these moments don't drag on forever. They happen fast. And when they do, everything changes. And here's the part most people aren't fully realizing. This isn't just about who starts at quarterback. This is about identity. Because whichever direction the Cleveland Browns choose, whether it's sticking with Deshaun Watson or moving forward with Shedeur Sanders, they're not just picking a player. They're choosing a philosophy. Because Watson represents something very specific. Experience, a proven track record, at least from earlier in his career. A bet that what once worked can work again. And for some teams, that's enough. They trust what they've already seen. They believe in restoring something that's been there before. But Sanders, he represents something completely different. Potential, growth, a new direction. A chance to build something from the ground up instead of trying to recreate the past. And that's why this decision feels so big. Because it's not just about right now. It's about what kind of team the Browns want to be moving forward. There's been growing discussion suggesting that teams in situations like this often face a deeper internal question. Do you chase what you've already invested in? Or do you pivot toward what might give you a better long-term outcome? Nothing officially confirmed as the Browns' exact mindset, but it's a common crossroads in the league. And when you look at this situation through that lens, it becomes clear. This is about direction. Short-term versus long-term. Stability versus upside. Familiar versus unknown. And there's no perfect answer, because both paths carry risk. Both paths require belief. Both paths demand commitment. And that's what makes this moment so defining. Because once the decision is made, there's no halfway. You can't build around two quarterbacks. You can't move in two directions at once. You choose one, and you live with it. That's how it works. And that's why this isn't just another storyline. This is a turning point, one that could reshape the entire future of the franchise. Because if they get it right, everything falls into place. But if they do, they're right back where they started, looking for answers, looking for direction, looking for the next solution. And that's what makes this moment so intense. Because right now, they're standing right at that crossroads. And whichever way they go, it's going to define everything that comes next.